this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Now look at this scene. Soldiers in battle, fighting, killing, guns, bombs, and missiles. For thousands and thousands of years, nations have been going into war against each other.
For us, these people are a part of stories in history books, pictures in newspapers, clips of video on the internet, or just something someone has told us. But these people are the same as us today.
Our neighbors, teachers, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, even people we see on the street, are all just like the people in those history books, fighting a war that we watch on TV years later after it is said and done.
We hear about the price of war in numbers. Billions and billions of dollars are spent in war. But the painful truth is that war is paid for by human life and suffering.
That is why we need to ask the question, is going into war the right thing to do? And this question should not be taken lightly.
In March of 2003, George W. Bush declared war on Iraq. Even then, people took sides as to whether going into war was the right thing or the wrong thing to do.
I'm Zach Davis.
And I'm Jacob Sandakly.
In the next few minutes, we are going to take a look at the Iraq War.
Was it the right thing to do?
Or was it the wrong thing to do?
In this presentation, I will be taking the position and debating on the side of the Iraq War being the right thing to do.
And I will be taking the position and debating on the side of the Iraqi war being the wrong thing to do.
To better understand the need for the war, you will need to learn and understand who Saddam Hussein was and how serious a danger he was. By age 19, Saddam Hussein was politically active and joined the Ba'ath Party, a socialist group at the time. 3 years after that, Saddam participated in a failed attempt at assassinating the Iraqi prime minister. He was forced to flee the country. In 1963, Saddam came home to Baghdad, and through his cunning ways, he rose to power. Saddam reportedly helped form secret police units that hunted down people who opposed Ba'ath rule. In 1979, he became president. It was also the time when 5 of his fellow members of the Revolutionary Command Council were executed, along with 17 of his other former competitors for the presidential spot. In 1980, Saddam launched a war against Iran that lasted 8 years. He killed 1 million Iranians and used mustard gas, killing and wounding more than 50,000 Iranians. Hussein decided to invade Kuwait in 1990 over oil and territorial disputes. His forces brutalized civilians and tortured them. As the Iraqi army was withdrawing from Kuwait, they looted Kuwait City, the capital, destroyed more than 700 oil wells, and opened pipelines to let oil pour into the Persian Gulf. According to the United Nations Commission of Human Rights, it is estimated that 300,000 Iraqi citizens have disappeared without a trace. Hussein also used human shields and hid arsenals beneath schools, mosques, and other cultural community places. Even after 10 years of sanctions, Saddam Hussein was ranked as the 55th richest man in the world, according to Forbes magazine, with a total worth of $7 billion. Since then, Saddam had had time to recuperate. Even with the sanctions imposed on him, he was able to deprive his people and provide lavishly to his close supporters. If Saddam was given a chance to rebuild his army, he would have definitely threatened the entire region. In March of 2003, George W. Bush finally decided to finish his father's work and oust Saddam Hussein.
The war against Iraq was the wrong thing to do for many different reasons. The first reason is that Saddam Hussein was absolutely no threat to the region or to any part of the world. After the 1990 war, the Iraqi regime did not only suffer from sanctions, but also from many different constraints, especially on his military, meaning he was forced to give up all of his most powerful weapons, like Scud missiles, chemical weapons, all that stuff. He was even made to give up any plans for high-powered weapons and such. His military planes were forced to abide by a no-fly zone, which limited the planes to a small part of the sky in Iraq. According to many credible experts and according to solid evidence, the Saddam regime was not capable of threatening any other country. The sanctions placed on Iraq were devastating to the country. Estimates of civilian deaths during the sanctions range from 100,000 to over 1.5 million, most of them children. The legality of the war was also questionable. For that we need to go back about 65 or 70 years ago, when the United Nations was just being formed. This was just after World War II ended. They made a charter to prevent another world war. The charter was made, quote, to maintain international peace and security, and for the suppression of acts of aggression, end quote. This charter stated that any war started must be in self-defense and authorized by the UN Security Council. The U.S. government suggested two major reasons for invading Iraq. Number one, Saddam Hussein was connected with Al-Qaeda. The Iraqi government was accused of sheltering and funding Al-Qaeda troops. Was that true or false?
False.
It was later found that Saddam Hussein had no connection with Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda. Number two, Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Iraq was accused of having developed nuclear weapons and other chemical and biological weapons. Was that true or false?
False.
Saddam Hussein did use chemical and biological weapons on his people prior to the war. The weapon inspectors confiscated and destroyed all of the weapons of mass destruction that he had after the Gulf War in 1990 and 1991. The United States did present this case to the United Nations, but the United Nations Security Council did not buy the evidence that was given. They denied the case, but the U.S. went ahead and invaded Iraq anyways. The former United Nations Security General Kofi Annan put it this way, quote, "I have indicated the invasion was not in conformity with the UN Charter. From this Charter's point of view, it was illegal," end quote. Therefore, was the Iraq War legal?
No!
As I just demonstrated, and I'm sure you'd agree, the decision to go to war with Iraq was the wrong thing to do. Many lives have suffered for no good reason whatsoever. First, Saddam Hussein posed no threat to the United States or any other country. Second, the war was definitely illegal according to international law, specifically the UN Charter. So I hope you agree with me that the war in Iraq was absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Now, wait a minute. I also just demonstrated the decision to go to war with Iraq was always the right thing to do. I'm sure everyone would agree with my point of view. Remember that first, Saddam Hussein didn't only pose a threat to the world, he actually went to war with two of his neighboring countries, and he attacked his own people with chemical weapons. Second, Saddam Hussein's ambitions to become an influential power in the Middle East were no secret. And finally, taking down Saddam's regime was the right thing to do, even during the 1990 Persian Gulf War. Unfortunately, that task was delayed for 13 years until 2003.
Now wait a minute. The war was totally the wrong thing to do. Anyone can see
But
that.
you really have to look at the history of the Gulf War in 1990 and before, when he was rising.
But that doesn't matter.
Well, what if it does?